Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is from the incredible mind of James Mitchell in part 2 in his brand new exclusive story that I just know you guys are going to sink your teeth into. As ever though, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story, entitled Return to the Creek in the Woods, Part 2. Let's get straight into that. A return to the woods. Sun Tzu wrote, "If you know yourself and you know your enemy, then you need not fear the outcome of any battle. Your victory is assured." I may be paraphrasing, but the sentiment rung around my head like a church bell. The thing that I had cut from moor to ear with a camp shovel, and nicknamed Scar, showed up at my house. It had been a month since I stumbled into the territory of some kind of nightmarish canine thing, and let me stress the plural aspect of that statement. As is often the case in the heat of the moment, I didn't realize how much trouble I was in. And after having my left shoulder and arm ripped open by a couple of creatures that were unlike anything described in any wildlife guide or zoological digest, and stumbling out of the woods on the verge of collapse, Scar and his friends treated my family and I to a chorus of howls to help quicken my exit from their territory, and as a show of strength, no doubt. And granted, pissing on the body of what I assume now was some kind of alpha and sticking his head on a pike, I may not have been the best farewell note, although, in my defense, it seemed like a good idea at the time. I think it will be a good time to explain that I'm a man of very humble means. Surprisingly, the market for construction workers or martial arts and fitness instructors that needed cane were in high demand. As a result, that trip to the woods was my attempt, after surgery and therapy, to find myself. And I did, in a very real way. Not in an abstract way that people go on about. Now, here is the thing. In my backyard, hundreds of miles from where the fight had been. I live in a small town in what could only be described as the sand trap of Colorado, and the tree line this thing was standing in was little more than that of a tree line on either side of a drainage ditch, for all intent and purposes. But to her credit, my daughter didn't run to the house after she screamed. She put down the laundry and waited for me to get to her, and together we watched him walk away. He didn't attack or even growl. He just stared at me, as if to say, "Found you." I should probably mention my daughter has trained with me since she was 4, and at 11 decided that she liked to shoot guns, and now she's 14 is a trap shooting surgeon with a 20 gauge. When Scar melted into the setting sun, I really didn't think too much about it when she went inside. I stood there watching to see if he had crested the ditch bank before I turned towards town, when here came my pumpkin, out of the house with a gauge, and saying things very inappropriate for a young lady to be saying. Whoa, young lady, what do you think you're doing?" I asked as I took the shotgun from her. As a side note, she had grabbed the number 4 shot, and not the bird shot at least. "That thing ain't gonna come up on me, in my yard. Hell no." Okay, she does take after me a little. That's gone now, and never chase after an animal that hunts in packs. I told her I don't know if that's true or well thought out, but it was enough for my 14-year-old daughter at the time. Not to mention how it would look for a young girl to be running down an easement behind houses with a shotgun yelling and chasing a monster. I got her to calm down and go inside, with the chance that her mother wasn't going to hear about it. I was non-existent. My sons met us coming in asking what was going on, so I sat them down at the kitchen table and told them what had happened. They hadn't imagined their sister, who is an honest student with a 4.0 GPA and is as chill usually as a teenage girl can be, would flip like that. That day had all been with my wife when she came to get me that day, but that made twice that my daughter had seen this thing, and honestly, I think it scared her. Not that it could tell, or she let on, but how it could not. And my wife was due home in half an hour, so I did the only thing I could. I put my boots on, packed 2 bowls, and I waited for my wife on the porch with her favourite adult beverage. While I waited, I had time to smoke and take it all in. And 2 hits into my bowl, I called my wife and told her to be careful coming home, what had happened, and that we will talk more when she got home. She said that she was ready to close and her Glock was in her locker, And my wife was a concealed carry permit and carries a .45 caliber Glock and is able to put 3 holes in an ace of spades at 35 yards all day. And her and I have worked on a draw and retention as well, ever since she got it a few years ago. And just in case I forget to mention, my wife is awesome. And firearms was a way that we could do all things together while I was hobbled. I finished my bowl, knowing that my family was capable of defending themselves from what might come, while I did what I knew I would have to do. I would have to return to the creek in the woods for a reckoning. I let my tears flow freely as I asked the Lord for the strength and grace to do what had to be done, and His protection for my family. Now, when my wife got home, we talked it out. She was dead set at first on calling in the Marines, but after I asked her to play that conversation in her head, she was quick to suggest pictures or video. And that counted, well, like Bigfoot. The laugh that followed broke the tension enough for me to paint a much more optimistic sounding plan than I actually had. With the stipulation, I'd get pictures this time, just in case. That night, I did what I suspect any man on the eve of battle would do. I cooked a meal for my family and spoke of nonsense and happy plans the way children do. I don't think the boys had any clue of what was really going on, but if my daughter did, she didn't let on. Maybe she did and just had more faith in me than I had placed in myself. The whole evening, my wife smiled and played along, but I caught more than one tear, which she didn't think I would notice. And after I put the kids to bed, I went outside and took a look around. I snuck down into the ditch and cleared it to the end of the neighborhood. I circled back and made sure that the thing was long gone. When I got back, I finished the night the way every husband on earth would. I held my wife very close and slept better than I had in a very long time, even before this insanity started, and I was grateful for it. The next morning, I put the kids on the bus as usual and got looking up anything I could find on the internet about these things and, shockingly, came up with a whole lot of not a damn thing useful. It's not that I thought I was going to find a monster repellent or extermination service, but I thought maybe there would be someone else who had seen these type of things. In truth, unless I found something like that, it wouldn't really have changed my plan. I never really put a bag like this together before. I've been on backpack hunting trips before, but this wasn't a hunt. When preparing for something like that, you aren't going to be the one hunted in return. Most of the time, anyway. In brown bear country, hunters and campers alike use electric fences and sound alarms to keep bears away from camp. Even if I had or could rig something like that, it would be very heavy and take time to set up, not to mention give away where I was. No, I needed a different strategy altogether. I decided that I didn't want to take any of the guns at the house. My wife would need her weapon, and my daughter at this point, having a gauge probably made her feel better. It made me feel better, knowing that they'd be able to handle things there themselves. We have other guns that I could have taken. 2 AR-15 style rifles, one in AUR 223 and one AUR 22, long, as well as the most American of all rifles, the workhorse and most versatile game slayer of them all, a bolt action 30-06. Not that I'm biased. If I had a gun that night, the one time it would have made a difference was when that beast was in full puffy chest mode. No, if I had relied on a gun, Junior would have been my end way, before his sire would have had the chance, or that fast and nimble female would have definitely been my end had the shovel not been in my hand. No, when it came, it would be fast and the rifle just wouldn't be the right tool for the job. I finished my coffee and started putting my gear together in the kitchen. An old man in Farmsburg, IN, told me about a bow hunt for deer that he wouldn't be walking next to any man that smelled like he'd done pissed himself, referring to the doe urine commonly used as cover scent by deer and other hunters. Walking downwind of a man, it smelled like an Italian restaurant. After we had both gotten a deer and had them hanging in camp, I asked the old man what he had used as a cover scent, and after a fit of a half-drunk laughter, the old guy told me how to make cover scent from essence of garlic, mint extract, and rosemary. I used it or some variant on every hunting trip since. I can't guarantee that it works. None of the deer I harvested ever filled out my post-hunting evaluation card. Next was my pepper balls this time. I could add a little kick to the mix by adding some crushed pepper and cayenne to the black pepper. It made a few palm-sized balls and a few smaller ones out of a few coffee filters and stored them in a Ziploc to keep them dry. I hadn't had to use one on the first encounter, but I was sure it would have done what it was supposed to do. I grabbed the disgusting emergency can of instant coffee from the cabinet and blew the dust off the lid, while my canteen and camel pack was filling. Now my hope is to move light, the bare minimum, and so I will be taking the addition to the kitchen supplies 100 feet of 150-pound paracord, a bottle of Zippo fluid with an accompanying Zippo lighter, Bic, and a small cylinder of waterproof matches. My resupplied and upgraded first aid and trauma kit with sutures, a topo map of the park and the surrounding area, and compass, a pencil, my leather jacket, and a small camp shovel. The camp shovel that had saved my life would not be accompanying me on this trip, and although it performed better than designed during the events of that endeavour, it was significantly bent and the spade was fairly deformed. Thus I retired it to a place of respect in my bedroom closet, mounted like a prize gun. Quietly, I donned the black tactical BDUs and Under Armour shirt that had been my uniform as a martial arts instructor for so many years. It fit just like I had never taken it off, even after 5 years, and all that I had struggled with, it seemed as if it had just been waiting for me. And as I put my insulated waterproof steel toes on, I watched my wife still sleeping in bed, and I almost lost my nerve. But what real choice was there for me? No, I had to go through with my plan. Grabbing my camo coveralls and a deep hooded sweatshirt, and being mid-spring in Colorado, at best the weather is unpredictable, at the elevation even more so, and a warm fire and a shelter are going to be a real option. I grabbed a roll of toilet paper and red-filtered headlamp, and all that was left before waking my wife was to pick the tools I would entrust my life to. My first choice was a naginata that an adult student gave to me after I helped them prepare for their black belt promotion. The handle was made from Japanese hardwood, and the blade had been hand-forged and had cost a pretty penny to have sent all the way from Osaka, and the student's wife had confided to mine it was a functional reproduction. The business end of the naginata is effectively a short and slightly wider at the base katana, and the handle is not quite 4 foot long, and wider at the top, tapering to where the hands rest. Next, I chose my sword of competition, cutting grade hand-forged, 3/4 tang, rayskin, and silk-wrapped hardwood handle katana that my wife had got me on our anniversary the weekend after my black belt promotion. I was almost as beautiful as my wife, and apart from her and the kids, this is the thing I treasured above all other things. I spent hours upon hours training with that sword. It was as much part of me at one time as my left arm, and now the realization of state I had left it in truly made me feel bad, and I cleaned it and wrapped it in a blanket, and then left it in my closet untouched, since shattering my leg. And as I had with all of my weapons from that time, and yet like the most loyal of friends, they had just been waiting for me to remember their use. A modern tactical tomahawk, Tonto-style fighting knife with a 7-inch blade, and a large camp knife would round out my tools of choice. Waking my wife left me only one more thing to do before we started our journey. It was something that I had dreaded almost as much, if not more, than facing down a horde of canine monstrosities in the woods, in the dark. Walmart. Had it not been the only place in town or on the way that I could count on to have the last few things, I needed to pull this off without being riddled with more scars. I never would have subjected myself to the depraved circus that is my local Walmart. I grabbed cold camp food energy bars, beef jerky, and a trail mix, 5 rolls of Gorilla Tape from the aisle with the guy talking to, either the shelf or a very well concealed Bluetooth. And then moving on to my kid's favourite aisle, the colouring book aisle, where I was called by an employee with green hair and more metal on his face than I had getting ready to pack for the woods. And wrapping colouring books around my thigh to see if they would fit, and turn around and walked away like I was the crazy looking one. And having assembled the pieces that I would need, and a few more just in case, I tried to gather my dignity on the way to the self-checkout automated lane, not wanting to have to make small talk as a cashier scanned my collection of no doubt odd purchases. And forgetting about the nosy greeter by the door who inevitably has to go through your bags and check the receipt. And having survived perhaps the most perilous part of this adventure, I finalized the plan with my wife and constructed a set of modular colouring book armor that would have impressed Alexander the Great himself. We hit a snag when we pulled up to the gate to the state park, and it was closed. The ranger, who was obviously trying to hasten his own departure, closing down the station. It told us in a roundabout, dodgy way that 3 weeks ago, a ranger had gone missing in roughly the area of my encounter, and her vehicle was found at that parking lot. While sidestepping my wife's well-placed distraction questions, I got him to say that the dogs wouldn't track and that she had been presumed dead, but had not been found, and that they assumed it had been an early brown bear attack. When I asked why he thought that, he got real quiet and then real pushy about us leaving, and that the park was closed for the season. And by the look of it, whatever search there had been was over, and we would have to drive around the outside of the park, and I would be an unfamiliar entry point. I looked over the map and found a good-looking spot on paper to go in from. And when we got there, I adjusted my planned route and drew it on my map to my wife, of which she then took a picture of it. I had my wife help tape the last bits of my colouring book armour in place and put my pants back on and my coveralls. And situated pretty well, I took off my naginata and kissed my wife and applied a liberal amount of my homemade cover scent. And I slipped as quietly as I could into the woods. A couple of 100 yards in, I crested a rise in the terrain and got low to the ground and tried to just listen to the woods for the sounds of the relaxed forest. And moving cross-country is not like walking a trail. It can be disorienting, not to mention more taxing physically. But I was focused, I had a plan, and it had to work. As darkness started to settle in on my first day of playing hide and seek with these things, I was still a few miles, no more than 5 or less than 3 from the parking lot and trailhead where this all started. I found a slight depression in the side of the hill and dug the 2 small pits for the Dakota fire with a small shovel, and as quietly as possible brought over some brush to make a sort of quick blind. I only made a fire long enough for a hot cup of joe with my energy bar and beef jerky dinner, and after I finished my less than satisfying and anything but relaxing meal, while the fire burned, I did a few one-hits and collapsed my pits. I crawled out of the blind and took a few steps away and doused myself once again in a cover scent. It was about an hour after dark getting my pack squared away that I picked a tree downwind of the depression, and I climbed high enough to be hidden and able to see the blind, and I watched the blind and waited, listening to the sounds around me for 2 hours, maybe a little longer, before I came down. I don't know what I had expected, but my quick respite seemed to have went unnoticed by the inhabitants of the woods gratefully. I wanted to angle more deeply into the woods and move more parallel and upstream to the creek than I had on my previous excursion. I had been keeping a steady pace and minded the direction of the wind until sunup. Digging a hole and doing my business, I covered it up and repeated the process from the night before on a new tree. I have to admit that I splurged on 2 cups of coffee, despite that I had rested my eyes for a few hours in the tree. Not the most restful nap I've ever had, but enough of a literal catnap to stay focused. And I was in what I assumed to be their territory, being further into the woods than my first camp had been. Climbing down from the tree, I decided it was time for the second part of the plan. Taking off the camo hunting coveralls, the time for hiding was coming quickly to an end. I gave thanks to the Lord that He had seen fit to have guided me and protected me this far, and asked that He grant me the same for what was to come. I put my tools in their proper places, my katana on my left hip in a traditional position, the military tomahawk on my right hand, down and secured to my thigh as not to dangle, my tonto blade on the back of my belt horizontally, and with a left-handed draw that would allow for a forward and reverse grip draw. I put my large camp knife in my left boot and divided my spicy pepper balls and put them into the cargo pockets of my BDUs. Then putting my leather jacket on, it was a little awkward wearing my colouring book and gorilla tape armour. If I did what I'd hoped that it would, what little discomfort I was in, I would be worth it. I switched the almost empty camel pack to its full replacement and emptied the rest into my canteen. I applied more cover scent liberally and put the canteen and Zippo on my rapidly crowded belt. Then, looking at the map, and my best guess as to where I was to choose a path that would let me approach the area I thought their den would be in, without walking into any natural funnels or ambush points, I hoped. I returned the map and situated my pack, and all these plans were based purely on assumption, but that's all I had. I assumed that their behaviour would largely be a pack of wolves and that they would have a territory, proportionate to the pack size, prey availability and proximity to water. Secondly, that my little camp had been at the edge of their territory, and that it had been a curiosity as much as the animals that had led to my little party by the creek. Having stewed on it for a while, now I also assumed that the ranger had wandered into their now expanded territory, and that, like wolves, they patrolled the edges of their territory in a regular fashion to mark and check for threats. As the day wore on, I was beginning to question that they were still in the area, or if a group had been here long at all. In a word, lush. Game trails crisscrossed the woods, and it seemed that every one of them I inspected had game sign scat and prints, but nothing looked odd at all. The animals of the woods seemed either unconcerned or oblivious to the creatures that were supposedly stalking this part of the woods. And just past midday, I saw 3 female elk grazing as I skirted a not too large clearing. And by late afternoon, I was beginning to think that maybe they were just a migratory, and it had been bad timing that led to the ranger and I having our encounters. My hope had been that I would see a pair or find some sort of sign or print or track, but so far I hadn't found anything at all. And wandering in the dark seemed like a bad idea. I found an outcropping of rock with a tree growing out of the crumbling rock. The nighttime chorus was like 1,000 times quieter, but nothing seemed out of place, and I was starting to question myself and this plan. I had decided that I would give it another hour or so, and then I would start building a fire and relaxing. This would be my second night in a cold camp type situation, and I was feeling it. The tension and exertion were taking its toll. All day I had crisscrossed game trails and paralleled a couple to the usual spots, the clearing with the elk, and one that seemed to lead in the direction of the creek. And I was just about to turn my headlamp on and get some wood when a short howl rang out. The sound made me feel like a child caught doing something wrong. I froze. This was what I had been here for. But now doubts was creeping into my mind, and it was time to face the bell, so to speak. And there I stayed, waited, still for a moment listening, for a response of anything else, but in the woods, it was silent now, as if holding its breath. And suddenly, I took up my naginata and pack and made for the direction of the howl, minding the wind. When as I got closer to where I thought the sound had come from, I started hearing the wet tearing sounds of a predator doing what it does. Approaching from downwind, I lowered to a crawl as the sound was very close. And then I saw 2 of the slimmer, shorter-coated ones, like Scar and the dark-furred one that looked like the beast and his pup had. I slipped off my pack and flattened out onto my belly and placing it next to me. I watched those things rip that elk apart and devour it ravenously in what seemed like minutes, and soon it had been reduced to a bloody pile of wrangled meat and viscera and long bones. Good, I thought, as they seemed to be losing interest in what bits were left, and looked like soon they would be on the move again. Surely after a meal of that size, then they would be on the way to a safe space to sleep it off, like their den, and then I would have what I came for. And the dark-coloured one stood and picked up the head of the elk with his clawed hand, and I braced for it to howl like a person anticipating a gunshot at the range. And then it rose to its full height. Instead, from my perspective, maybe 50 yards away, give or take, it looked like it was sniffing the air. My heart sank as the other 2 did the same. The wind, what little breeze it was, hit me in the face, and my scent couldn't have given me away, and yet, as one, they all 3 started walking upright in my direction. I gripped the naginata tightly, hoping they'd change course, but every step brought them closer. The darker one flanked on either side by the slimmer 2. I was completely racking my brain for a way to avoid a fight, but they just kept getting closer. When the range was right, I took a deep breath and sprang up, swirling hard. I separated the closest thing's head from its body and allowed the momentum to carry me into a thrust to the dark-coloured one's ribs. Neither beast had an opportunity to react as the tip of the naginata ripped through both lungs of the dark-haired one, who still held the skull of the elk in its clawed hand. Before I could blink or remove the blade of the naginata from the dark-haired beast, the other one hit me like a freight train. And as we fell, I let go of the naginata and tried to turn into the attacker and land without getting the wind knocked out of me from the hit. Our landing would have impressed my jiu-jitsu coaches. I managed to turn enough to land on my back, able to defend against this thing. The thing tried to bite my face, and I shoved my right arm deep into its maw to keep it from biting down. And just like a dog, it tried to shake its head free to bite again. Not giving it a chance, I pulled what I could, best described as a very modified scissor sweep. I used its off-balance momentum to roll the thing over. I pulled the tonto blade from my left hand, and on the way over, I plunged it into the thing's chest, intending to pierce the lung and quickly dispatch it, but I missed my mark. And the thing wailed, its legs flailing, trying to find purchase, scraped my face, and I sliced the thing's throat, pushing the head away from the cut, trying not to be covered with the spray of blood that was to follow the cut. The realization of the situation struck as hard as the creature had. They were on the way home, and I was in the way. I jumped into my feet, my bloody face would have to wait. I replaced my knife and grabbed a pepper ball from each pocket. I ripped the first over the body of the one I had rolled with, and the other over the first two. I grabbed my bag and blade from the scene of the melee, and in the closest thing to running since my quote-unquote accident, I made for the nearest tree. Not stopping to situate the pack, I shimmied up the nearest large tree. My colouring book, armour and leather jacket had kept that thing from doing any real damage. But a new coat would be in my immediate future if I lived through this, I thought. Finding a perch in the tree, I opened the compartment of my bag, that housed the first aid kit, and with fevered hands quickly slapped a pre-medicated gauze pad to my face, suppressing the urge to cry out. The thing split open my earlobe and gashed my cheek in two jagged lines that, thank goodness, missed my eye. The call that came from the direction they had been moving towards was a low, menacing rumble, not unlike a growl but projected with a melodic, yet creepy undertone. I had barely caught my breath when I saw the first one come into view. Walking upright, and as silently as a shadow, this beast was massive, to an almost absurd proportion. He stood stock still, just short of the scene of carnage, and as if out of thin air, was joined by two more, every bit the size of a beast I had faced that night at my camp. But all they served to do was accentuate how much larger this thing was. I was a good 20 feet up this tree, and I wasn't sure that thing wouldn't be able to flat jump this high. And as if things couldn't get worse, 5 of the short-haired Scooby variants came into view, staying on all fours, as if on cue. They ran to the bodies of their fallen pack members and started sniffing the bodies. And had I not been where I was, what happened next, I would have been funny. As if almost on unison, all 5 started coughing the way dogs do, half sneezing. The pepper had done its work better than I thought it would. The short-haired ones were rubbing their maws in the dirt and snorting, that turned quickly to more of a few whines from the masses of snot and drool, and hopefully rendering them useless for what I could only hope would be a while. Distracted by the cartoonish scene of those things writhing in pain, like a guy that's been maced, I hadn't noticed the brute had been staring in my direction, as if he knew I was there. The brute suddenly just turned his back, without so much as a sound, and walked back into the shadows, the same way he had come from leaving the rust to their misery. He no more than vanished when Scooby Gang ran off in different directions, squealing like whipped dogs. And I took this respite to consider what I knew and what I assumed, as I played to apply the butterfly bandages properly to the gashes in my cheek and my very split ear. A chuckle slipped as I thought of Scar. Scar and his ilk seemed to be submissive to the more bestial ones. These things are fiercely loyal to each other. Their sense of smell seems to be on par with the scent hounds' breeds of domestic dogs. They possess a level of strength proportional to a dog of comparable size, which is significant considering the muscle density of dogs could be 5 times that of a person of the same weight. And the claws were distinctly canine but differ between the groups. The claws of the beast were sharp and had almost a curve to them that reminded me of a Filipino knife, known as a karambit. The one that just tagged me had claws like a dog that hadn't ever seen pavement or nail clippers, blunt and almost painfully long to the animal. As well, its paw looked more canine than the beast's hand. My arm even with the added protection, was sore to the bone, and had it been able to bring the full force of its bite to bear on my armor, it would have been shattered. My fingers still tingled from the bite. I could only guess that it would be like the bite of a pit bull of the same size. But if I get a chance to tell it, I'm going to compare it to an alligator. I don't think I want to find out if the bigger ones bite harder. Now, these creatures are most certainly canines, and yet they act very strangely compared to dogs or wolves. First being their aversion to daylight, they seem to almost exclusively move at night. The thing I find the weirdest is the cooperation between the two types. That is very contrary to usual canine behavior. Wolves typically will kill any coyote, feral dog or wolf that doesn't belong to its pack. And that implies a couple of things at least to me, that they shared some kind of basic bond, and that they were more intelligent than their more familiar counterparts. The latter is terrifying, and to what extent I can't imagine. I stayed in the tree until dawn. I got what I had come for. I decided it was time for the next phase of the plan. I knew where their den was, and I had a pretty good idea of how many there were left. I had to meet my wife at the agreed spot tomorrow, and getting there with these things agitated was going to take finesse. Having not heard so much as a bird chirp or cricket in hours, I climbed down from my perch. And as soon as I was down, I opened my bag to get my cover scent out, and realized I wasn't alone. Turning, the brute was right there, so close his sheer physical presence was almost overwhelming. I felt like and probably looked like a child to this thing. I barely stood as tall as this thing's mid-chest. I was close enough that even the orange and shadow dance of dawn's first light, I could make out every scar he had acquired. The definition of his musculature was lean. Obviously this was a creature bred for fighting. The way this thing moves is remarkable. Something his size made no noise at all in its approach. I knew he had seen me the night before. He had watched hidden, waiting for me to come down. I don't know if I'm more in awe of his cunning and skill, or mad at my own arrogance and stupidity. I looked up to meet the gaze of this thing, taking notice for the first time of the patch of white fur that ran from the bottom of its maw to the V of its neck. The look on this thing's large wolf-like face was what I could only imagine a cat would regard a mouse with. Now, thank God, it was his turn to succumb to arrogance, as he reached back to use his massive clawed right hand to no doubt rend me apart with one swing. My hand found my sword, and I loosed my katana, and with a feint back letting it catch the brute's arm, just behind the wrist. I severed it cleanly right through the bone, causing the clawed strange hand to fall harmlessly behind me. And gripping the sword with both hands and timing his retraction of the stump, I swung the sword upwards again, stepping into his retreat and cutting it from his right hip to the opposite side rib. His roar barely registering as I felt the resistance of his rib on the front portion of my blade. I bent my knees and twisted the tip of the blade inside the monstrosity and shoved it upwards to the hilt. The 28-inch blade just penetrated between the brute's collarbones on the right side of its body. It growled with what breath it had as I started to free my sword. The brute's left hand caught me off guard and sent me and the sword flying away from it and into a nearby tree, popping my left shoulder out of socket badly. I screamed out this time, but the work had been done. The brute fell trying to take a step to where I was and slumped against the tree. On my shoulder, I was dislocated badly, and using my sword I pulled myself to my feet and stumbled to my naginata and pack. I turned to start towards my wife and rest when it occurred to me better. These things fear me at this point. I took the lighter fluid out of my pack, used it all on the brute's body. I took a few deep breaths, lighting the brute on fire. And then I yelled at the top of my lungs, a primal yell of victory and challenge. And the body won't burn long, but the smell will undoubtedly reach the den almost as quickly as my challenge. I took my time walking away, no doubt under the eyes of those things. I made a show of walking confidently, taking a great pain, literally to walk as if I was uninjured. And I didn't stop or look back until late afternoon. I slung my arm and smoked openly, My body racked with pain, I pushed forward. The weed helped with my pain and focused my wandering mind. I decided to keep moving until I reached the meet-up spot with my wife. And by midnight, I had arrived at the spot and built a fire. And finally, sitting on a fallen log by the fire, I gave thanks for the grace and protection that God had granted. I ate and drank with my back to the road, maybe 20 yards behind me, and my naginata beside me. I thought to myself, this time there was no slipping or luck. I had done exactly what I had meant to. And now I know my enemy and was about to become the thing that they have nightmares of. Wow. Selling another one. Wow. What a chest-pounding, exhilarating, and intense story there. Exclusive to the TeamFEAR channel, from the incredible mind of James Mitchell. A massive thank you to you, James, for penning this next installment. I really did enjoy your writing very much, and look forward to any more updates or new stories from yourself in the future. Well, guys and girls as ever, you know the drill. Please do let me know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. If you're an aspiring writer or would just like to get in touch with me, then please do so on the contact email, which is, as on screen, contactthedeadone@gmail.com. I really look forward to hearing from you. I hope you're having a fantastic weekend with friends or family, with good food and even better company, and you're trying to stay fit and focused. But above all, guys, remember, be safe, not sorry. The weed smoke hope. The weed. Said when I'm on a weed. Puffing the herb, puffing the herb. Puffing the herb, puffing the herb. And this is chill as you. And this is chill. And this is chill. Usually as a teenage girl could be. And this is. We have other guns that I could have taken. 2 AR-15 style rifles, one in a point. And situated pretty well, I took off my naginata and kissed my wife and applied a liberal amount of my homemade Situated pretty well, I took off my naginata and kissed my wife and applied a liberal amount of my homemade and I was just about to turn my headlamp on and get some wood when a short howl rang out. The sound made me feel like a child